All right, y'all, just a quick little note on the blurriness that you're about to see. I usually screw up in the statistics and the info cards once a week. Well, this week my screw up was that I left my lens on manual focus, so I'm going to be a bit blurry in some videos this week. Sorry, y'all. We'll do better next week. College football nerds here to talk Baylor and Oklahoma for the second time this year. This time a little more on the line with the Big 12 championship game. Before we get into it, I want to remind y'all a couple of things, a little bit of housekeeping. We do a hypothetical discussion with our computer model and a little bit of our observations and analysis this week if you want to watch it for Utah and Oklahoma. The discussion is going to be if these two teams make it into the playoffs or make it through their conference championship games, who should be in the playoffs. We throw a model at it. We talk about it. Just wanted to put that one out there. We also have an audio version of this, iTunes and Android. If you want to kind of listen instead of use up all your data and you don't want to look at me, well, the audio version is going to be out there today. All right, so Josh, let's talk about this game. We can't talk about it without framing it up around the first game. And I want to start by saying Baylor really surprised, I think both of us. I don't want to speak for you, but I'm going to say for myself, they surprised me. I had a lot of concerns about their really close wins against crappy teams, and they came out and just punched OU in the mouth, and the moment was not too big for them, which to me speaks to coaching. I was really impressed. It seemed like as that game wore on, Oklahoma's comeback sort of proved out to be who these teams were. And to me, and I don't want Baylor fans to take that as a slight, it's not. I think they're an elite team, or they're a great team, and they deserve a high ranking and opportunity to win their conference. To me, it felt a lot like, and I want you to weigh on this, it felt a lot like a team when you have a team that's outmatched and they play over their head, they play completely over their head, but they know in the end that they don't want this game getting into overtime. North Carolina, Clemson reminds me of that a little bit, where we see them go for too late in the game because they know that they're running out of gas, they're living on borrowed time, and they don't want to get into overtime because they know that it's probably not going to go well for them. This game feels like overtime to me. And I don't know that it's fair, especially given that I just set up, my praise for Baylor. I don't know that it's fair, but we've got one team with the postseason experience, one team with the postseason experience quarterback. It feels like this might be the overtime of the game where the team that's the incumbent comes roaring back and eventually outplays the other team that was playing over their head. Does it feel like that to you, or maybe is this a complete reset?
My personal feeling on that first game, it was like the tale of two halves. And you could sort of see, on one hand, it felt like the momentum swung. On the other hand, if you follow our channel long enough, you kind of know that I see the value of momentum, but I think it's more to it than just that. I mean, teams turn and swing, but it's more figuring things out, getting stuck out of a groove. And sometimes teams just string together a series of bad drives when we feel like they don't have a momentum, quote unquote. And they string together good drives when we feel like they do have momentum. You guys are going to have to forgive me if you watch all their videos this week because I'm kind of under the weather, but I'm fighting hard here. It's championship week. I think somewhere in the middle probably is where that game was, and I think that's kind of what you would get in an overtime scenario. So to answer the question, I think I agree with you. I think Baylor was a good team, and you saw that late in the game that Baylor kind of started to rally a little bit. It's like they had a big lead, and they felt like they were in control, and all of a sudden they realized that Oklahoma was coming back, and they kind of got shell-shocked. To a certain degree, they were going maybe too conservative offensively, but more than anything, I think they just lost a sense of urgency. And what they're going to both realize now, Oklahoma and Baylor, is we got to actually show up and play football and play for 4 quarters to win this game. Because I guarantee if one of them doesn't, they're probably going to lose. I don't know that Oklahoma really has a significant edge in that game. I don't think it was by any means a fluke that it was close. Oklahoma's played close to a lot of teams. Baylor's been very good. Baylor pretty well stuck it to Texas. I do think this is, like you said, it's overtime of that game. Anything can happen. The intensity's back on for both of them, and we're going to have to see how it pans out.
and it's a tough question to answer, and I don't know that we really have the answer to that because we didn't know who Baylor was, and we felt like we knew who Oklahoma was coming into that game. And now, to me, I think that in some regard, the Baylor game was Oklahoma-Kansas State if Oklahoma scored one possession sooner than they did. That's kind of what it felt like to me. But what scares me a little bit is the flip side. The thing that scared me about Baylor is starting to scare me about Oklahoma. The TCU game is kind of it is a canary in the coal mine. The TCU game, obviously the Kansas State data point that we have, the Iowa State game, 41-42. I don't think Iowa State's a terrible team, but at some point, if you're a playoff caliber team, you need to handle your business against these type of opponents. Now, I don't know that Baylor is a playoff caliber team, but in my mind also, I don't know that anybody out of the top three is a legit playoff caliber team, which means 4 through 7 or 8 are probably all in the same bucket. And Baylor, we have just outside that bucket in our top 10 this week. But I think Baylor is a good enough team and Oklahoma is a flawed enough team that even though Baylor's the underdog in this game and was the scrappy team that sort of had the gas, let out at the very end, I don't know that these two teams coming around the second time that we're looking. So this is the second retread game we've done. We did the Ohio State-Wisconsin game. We're like, it's going to look a lot like the first one. I think final score-wise, this one might look a lot like the first one.
It very well might. Do you mind if I go ahead and get in the model so we can sort of frame this discussion?
No, let's go ahead and get the numbers.
So I think the model's maybe less interesting in this game because we've already seen one version of it. I think a lot of you have seen our show. You kind of know how it plays out. Per play statistics, look at how you do against your opponent, sort of relationally, look at your strengths, your weaknesses, how you respond individually to certain scenarios, and place a score and a yardage prediction for your team relative to all that data. Now, when you look at these two teams, it's unsurprising that Oklahoma is expected to get more yardage than Baylor, or at least be more effective per play. It's unsurprising that the game is close. Baylor does have a better defense than Oklahoma, significantly better pass defense, which I think is the important thing, especially in the Big 12, especially with how Oklahoma plays. I think it's notable that Baylor's run defense at 85% is merely good. Really, we don't say very good as anything more than 80%. But the score here, 35-29. The first game was 34-31, and it's very similar to what we just did with the Wisconsin-Ohio State model. This model does not look and match to past games. It's not saying these two teams played before it has to be the same result. It's just saying that based off the way the season's gone, based on your performances in all games, weighting them all equally, looking at them all equally, yeah, that's kind of the predicted output. It's about 35-29, aka 6-point game instead of a 3-point game, bracketed around the same dadgum score that you had last time you played. So the model is basically saying last game wasn't an aberration. That's what you should expect from Oklahoma and Baylor. And to sort of look at, I'll do one little quick dive on the statistics before we transition. In the game against Baylor, Oklahoma was 6.9 yards per attempt, 4.4 yards per carry. Here they're about 5.3 yards per carry, 8.7 yards per attempt. So it's actually overestimating their offensive production a little bit. Baylor, 6.7 yards per attempt, 4.9 yards per carry last time. Here, 4.7 yards per carry, 7.5 yards per attempt. Skewing, maybe a little more pass happy here than run happy. That has a little bit to do just how a defense is scheming run versus pass. So it is saying that Oklahoma really maybe had a slight bad day last time. But basically what we got last time, as far as the model is concerned, that last game is a pretty fair overall description of where these two teams are.
And I think it's worth taking a second and praising both of these teams for turning around defensively who they are this year versus who they were last year. And we talked about how Oklahoma didn't need to, if they were going to we felt like they were going to take a step back, they needed to take just a little step forward to have tremendous impact on their team makeup and kind of close that gap in the step back on offense. they've done more than that. Oklahoma's defense has been really impressive this year, bordering on good. Save that weird Kansas State situation where they just got bullied. Baylor, I can't really explain why their defense has been as good as it. I thought that some of it was because of the opponents they had played early in the season. They had a really poor out of conference schedule. They had a light load first half of the season in terms of conference opponents. I thought that was playing into their defensive numbers, and it might have been, but you don't see those slip-ups really like we would see in the old Big 12 plays bad defense. And when we say that, we don't say, 2018 West Virginia with Will Grier and a great offense scored 45 on you and you beat them 48-45. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about when you give up 45, 50 points to a good offense, and then you turn around and give up 50 to Texas Tech, or you give up, 39 to Kansas State or Kansas. Baylor hasn't done that this year, which again all signs point to them being more than just, is this a fair comparison? They are an actual good team where Minnesota was very much a product of their schedule, and they're completely different in that regard.
I think that's fair. And if you watch our other videos and you watch us all season, we were pretty darn critical of Minnesota. Now, Baylor had one close game against Rice, but it was one close game. Minnesota opened with 4 close games to bad teams to start the year. I think they had one really motivated, really good game against a top-end opponent in Penn State at home. And I think when you have those single one-off huge games in a home stadium, you do sometimes play over your head. Quite frankly, you can talk about the Texas-LSU comparison all you want. Initially, we chalked it up to injuries with Texas. I'm having to walk back my mathematical mind a little bit and sort of admit that was Texas's Super Bowl. And that was maybe a game where they played over their head. And I think Baylor is a lot more legitimate because what we saw from Baylor is, they soundly beat Kansas State. They soundly beat Oklahoma State. They really played close and tough against Oklahoma. They had close games against West Virginia and TCU. Now, those are not good data points, nor is the close game against Texas Tech. But overall, they were pretty darn good. And they were pretty good consistently with the occasional hiccup, but not like a Minnesota where it really wasn't anything good outside games against backup quarterbacks, which they played 5 in a row. And we're saying this because there's probably a lot of comparisons made between Baylor and Minnesota. I think Baylor is a more legitimate team. I think they're more complete. And I think a lot of the credit really needs to go to Matt Rule. And it's kind of funny, bad. I think if you're realistic about it, there's always these criticisms of Big 12 defenses. I think Rule came in and he installed a good scheme. He started coaching these kids up. He taught them to play sound football. And a lot like what we've seen from TCU over the years with Gary Patterson, this is why I think there is an issue sometimes with defense in the Big 12. Because you've got a good coach that came in there and he made this unit really good, even though they're not as talented as some of their opponents. And TCU often does the same thing. And I think it speaks to the fact that the coaching wasn't good. And heck, if you want to flip it to the other side of the ball, Grinch has made Oklahoma, like you said, a pretty solid defense. And that shows that Oklahoma was not up to their potential. They were not a great defense last year. You can see the improvement. And if you see the improvement, then you have to be willing to step back and be fair and concede the defenses were not great last season. I think these are two good teams. They're good in different ways. I'll flip it around one to another thing. And you always ask me, the questions. And I think this is maybe the deciding point in my mind in this game. How much do you think it matters that Oklahoma seemed to be a slightly better team than Baylor the time before, and Oklahoma didn't have CeeDee Lamb? How much do you think CeeDee Lamb matters to Oklahoma? And how much do you think CeeDee Lamb may change the way this game flows, given that they are good at defense, but no one has been able to cover CeeDee Lamb one-on-one?
I mean, we've been high on him since last year. We were high on him before he had his way against Alabama. We obviously, one of the top wide receivers is going to be in the draft. I think it matters. I don't think it matters as much as people are going to want to say, because Oklahoma still ended up having a great offensive day. It's interesting, though, because one of the other things that we've seen that's become a pattern has been Jalen Hurts turning the ball over. And what I would say is, what does Oklahoma look like? Getting CeeDee Lamb back is huge, but what does Oklahoma look like in a game where Jalen Hurts doesn't turn the ball over? It looks more like Oklahoma versus Houston or UCLA earlier in the year, and not Jalen Hurts versus Baylor or TCU. So I think that's the thing for me. And I'm going to go ahead and get my score now. I fully believe Baylor is a legit top 10 team. I really do. I think they're a good team. If not legit top 10, right on the edge, 12, 11, 12, something like that. It's almost unfair that I think they're going to lose this game and they're going to have 2 losses and it's going to be to the same team, but it's going to count as 2 losses. It's almost not fair. It's absolutely not fair. Give me 34-27 Oklahoma, and one last point on the defenses, because everybody's come out and said now, all the Big 12 fans have said, oh man, look, now the SEC plays a shootout with Alabama LSU or Alabama Auburn with scoring all these points. Now all of a sudden it's not bad defenses, it's great fun offenses. No. Alabama's defense is the worst it's been since like 2004. It's trash by comparison. So I think that a lot of people are saying, like, yes, it was a fun game to watch, but if you talk to Alabama fans, if you talk to Auburn fans, they're very, very, they're going to tell you that was a lot of a product of bad defensive football play and not just some elite offenses. I'm not sure Mac Jones rolls his helmet out against Ohio State and puts up 40 points. And we've seen that in the past. To your point about Oklahoma last year to this year defensively, it's night and day. The same thing is going to happen if Alabama plays a great defense next year. If they're a good defensive team next year, then people are going to point back to this year and say, this was a bad defense. It wasn't just a product of playing really good offenses. Auburn's offense isn't very good. Alabama's defense is bad this year. Oklahoma's defense is you can see the improvement. You can see the improvement in Baylor's defense. They gave up 30-something to Vanderbilt in the bowl game. It's night and day, and that's why I'm excited about the future of Big 12 football, is because the defense is playing better, which means, like you said, we have to acknowledge that they weren't playing great in the past and move forward. That's a lot of talking from me. Give me your score.
So my score is not all that different from yours. I have Oklahoma 34-24. Like you, I do think Oklahoma's a very good team. I think Baylor is a top 10 caliber team. And we talked about, if you watch it, you can watch our top 10 video and we make this point, but I'll sort of summarize it. They're sort of tiers. There's really 3 tiers in that top 15 range. Oklahoma is in the second tier pretty clearly. Baylor's in the third. And that third team is your top, right around top 10 teams. That tier is enough for me for like 7 to 10 points. Each tier jump is something like 7 to 10 points. I personally think CeeDee Lamb is a bigger deal than you. I mean, I hinted at that earlier. I think CeeDee Lamb is one of the best receivers in college football right now, if not the best receiver. There's some really good ones out there, so you can debate that a lot. But he's been almost unstoppable in the Big 12. And I think, given where Baylor's at, I think that matchup is a huge deal. But I also agree with you. Look, Jalen Hurts has been fumbling the ball. They've been turning it over. He had issues with fumbles in Alabama. We've called this out before. They don't track fumbles very heavily in college football, so I think it kind of went under the radar. But he fumbled a lot at Alabama. He didn't throw interceptions, which people would talk about turnovers, but he actually fumbled the ball quite a bit. But the bigger thing for me, it's a little bit of a concern, is even getting CeeDee Lamb back. Oklahoma was held to 6.9 yards per attempt, Baylor and TCU back-to-back. There are signs that passing attack isn't quite clicking. And that makes me, last week he's 9.8 yards per attempt, but only in 17 attempts in a game where they didn't completely blow Oklahoma State out, such that the scrubs were in the third quarter at least. I think there's signs it's slowing down. I think CeeDee Lamb just balances out to right around the same score they had last time. I think Baylor they came out punching hard in that last game, and I think they're going to struggle to really keep up that intensity. I think it's going to be close to the same game. I think Oklahoma will be a little more in control of it in a more traditional game from the jump. and just slowly pull away as it draws out. But nothing will shock me. I think Oklahoma's a very good team. I think Baylor's just very good as well. And like you said, the coaching improvement on the defensive side of the football for both teams is pretty stark, and I think it has to be recognized.
And as we always say, a one-score prediction means anything can happen, and it wouldn't surprise us. 10 points is pretty close to one score, but I think that's where we're at. All right, y'all. Thanks so much for hanging with us on this preview, this second time around discussing these two teams. I want to remind y'all, we also have a quick little hypothetical on what would happen if Oklahoma played Utah, because the discussion is going to be Oklahoma or Utah for that playoff spot if they both win their conference championships. So we do a quick discussion of that this week as well. Throw our computer model at it, give it a little bit of seasoning from our end. It's a pretty short one, but y'all check it out. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, and God bless.